So good, guys. You really need to read this story. Hey friends and book lovers, and welcome back to my channel. Now, as you know, today I am doing a review on the Gilded Ones by Namina Forna. This book is coming out February 9th in 2021, so just a few short days away, and I was gifted this copy in a fairy loot box. That was a few months back. I've been meaning to read it, but I finally got to it in January, and I finished it today, and I wanted to put up a review because it is so good. So while this is a review, it is very much a gush review because I absolutely adored and loved this book. This is part of a trilogy, and I honestly cannot wait for the second one to come out. I have heard some rumors that it's coming out in 2021, which would be amazing to get a sequel so soon because I'm finished and I need to know the next part in this world and in this story. So the way that I've been doing these reviews are in 5 parts. So I look at the world building, I look at the writing, I look at the characters, the plot, and my own personal enjoyment of the story. So I think what I'll do is I'll start with one of these items and we'll move on to the rest, followed by some general comments. I'm gonna start with the world building because I feel like this was done really, really well, and every chapter there was a little bit more discovered. So at the beginning of the novel, you don't get a complete info dump on what the world is like and what the dangers are, but you do get an overview of what the character knows, and this is written, I think, in first character since we are following the perspective of the main character, but we tend to follow what she knows of the world, and it's not much. I really do enjoy that we learn about the world as the main character learns about the world because it makes it a lot more digestible and it makes it more fun to read. I didn't want to put this book down at times, and I had to because I had other books that I had to finish beforehand, but this book I really, really wanted to continue on, and the last part of the book I honestly couldn't put down in the last couple days, so it went by super quickly, but I digress. For the world building, it is beautifully done. It's done in wonderful stages of getting like a little bit and then a little bit more and then a little bit more. So you're discovering things the way the character is discovering, and it lays out this really nice foundation for everything that you discover later to make a lot of sense as things go on in the novel. So I felt like the world building was really great. The descriptions of the cities and the places that we were spending a lot of time in were really well done. I feel like I was very immersed in the story because the world building was done so well, and the descriptions of all the places was so well done, but not overly done, that I felt like I was very captivated by this world, and I constantly wanted to learn more about the world. So the next item I'm going to discuss is the plot, and this was also done really masterfully. We have all these different things that are kind of coming together and happening at the beginning and the middle of the novel that weave together really beautifully, especially at the end of the novel. So if you like books like that, which I really, really do, that weave together really beautifully and kind of all tie in at the end and all end up making sense, and you just end up being like, oh my god, yeah, I remember that. I didn't even think that deep into it, but it was all so well planned and everything was so well woven in this world that it was just so beautiful and satisfying to read. I also really felt like, though it is a fantasy world, it's very believable and the consequences are also pretty high stakes. It is a young adult novel, so it's not as high stakes as an adult novel, but it was still really high stakes. This plot is very dark, it's very brutal, and the elements are very triggering, so I'll mention that later on in the video. And I think that the genre this would fall under would likely be the grimdark genre, even though it's YA, because it does deal with really dark and brutal themes, lots of violence, there's definitely gore, and overall the atmosphere is quite dangerous and the characters are very morally gray, which I will get to next. And for the plot, in the last 100 pages, those threads just get explained and get tied in and woven so beautifully that the last 100 pages are very action-packed and very, not info dumpy, but you get a lot of the information that you were discovering slowly all in one, and you get the explanations that you were craving and the loose ends that weren't explained during the middle of the book. And that ends up being really satisfying for me because you get these morsels, so you're satisfied as you're reading it, and then you get this big reveal at the end of certain themes and elements and backgrounds and histories that really make you understand the world, and it kind of flips everything upside down. Like, I felt like I was like, wow, like I was not really expecting this. I didn't really see it that way, and maybe for other readers that have read a lot of novels, you might expect it and might see it, but I really didn't. And I felt like that plot was done in such a great way. You get these morsels which keep you wondering who is who is good, who is bad, who is the monster, etc., etc. And then all of that ties in later in the book, and it's just, oh, it's so good, guys. You really need to read this story. The next item is the characters. They are complex and definitely very morally gray, like I mentioned. You do have like the initial, oh, this is good and this is bad, and this person is X and this person is Y, but then you start to understand people a little bit more. You get their backstories, and that to me is really, really important because it makes them these complex, lived-in characters rather than, you know, just the hero and the villain. And our characters are faced with making really hard decisions that as an adult, I'm not even sure that I would be capable or prepared to make, but these young characters end up making them, and it renders them very morally gray. And those are the most interesting characters in my mind because they're not always predictable. They have certain traits that make them who they are, but they're not always predictable. And it makes the story that much more interesting and exciting. So that for me is a big plus because I do feel like in YA, characters are much less morally gray than in adult. In YA, you always have a clear view of like the hero and the villain and the people in between, but you don't quite get all the characters being as morally gray as they are in this. And that to me is so good, and to have that in a YA novel I think is so good, and this is so well done. You should read this, definitely. The next part is the world building, and that will go quick because there are authors like Brandon Sanderson that I've discovered are very simple and to the point, and that helps the story go along. And then there are other authors like, I can think of Chloe Gong, who's very flowery and very descriptive, and there's all this language that you kind of have to get through in order to get to the plot, and sometimes that can feel thick for readers that don't enjoy it. But Namina Forna's writing kind of stands in between. It's not super simple, but it's also not super flowery. I feel like you get the descriptions that you need, and at times it can be really beautiful and flowery when it calls for that, but then at times it can be really simplistic and straight to the point when it needs that as well. And I feel like the pacing and the writing is done so well that it accommodates the plot and the characters so that you kind of know where you are, you kind of know why you need this language, and it helps shape the world and shape the scenes that you're in. Honestly, I'm a huge fan of Namina Forna's now. I think as she releases more books in this trilogy, they're definitely going to be auto-buys for me. And if she does another fantasy trilogy, that's also going to be an auto-buy for me. So she's rendered me, even just from her writing, an auto-buy author, and I'm so excited to have another one in my like list of authors that I just have to buy from. Overall, this novel is so good. It's almost like a coming of age, gathering a sense of belonging, figuring out who you are, finding your place in the world type of novel. It's very much about female empowerment and looking at patriarchy and what that means for women in the world. And so she made this novel about very strong women who can do anything they want to do, and it is just purely amazing. I love seeing novels where females are very strong, equally as strong, and able to kick ass just like any other male character. As many of our characters are female, there are definitely sapphic romances that do happen. It just feels more realistic to me. And I do have to say, this book captured me from the first sentence. It is just that good. And it also captures me just from the taglines. I mean, these are so good. They say, are we girls or are we demons? Are we going to die or are we going to survive? In this bold and immersive fantasy, a young heroine fights to save a world that would dare tame her and discovers she is her own fiercest weapon. I mean, come on, that is so badass. And you know what? I really enjoyed this novel. It was one that I wanted to keep reading. It was one that I kept gushing about as I was reading it. It's one that I want everyone who loves fantasy, who loves strong female characters, who loves, you know, the brutal, dark, kind of grim, dark genre to read it. I think you would really enjoy it. Even adult readers would really enjoy it, and even young adult readers I think are really gonna love it and maybe even relate to some of the themes in this, especially when it comes to female empowerment and discovering who you are. There are some trigger warnings. Like I said, this is very violent, it's very brutal, it's very gory. There are battle scenes, there is death. There's also a sexual abuse and just abuse in general and abandonment. And so if those are items that you do not want to read about as they are triggering, just please note that. And I do know that the book also lists these trigger warnings as well. So it is dark, but it is really good. And if you can withstand those warnings, I would say go for it. I loved it. It was so good. It's up my alley. It should be up everyone's alley, and these are all the reasons why you should read it. So I hope you enjoyed this review. If there are items that I didn't cover and that you have questions on, please leave them in the comments on below, and I will be sure to answer them in a non-spoilery fashion so that you can still enjoy the book when and if you get to it. And if you like this video, please click on the like button. And if you did enjoy this video, check out my other content and be sure to subscribe, because I am sure that there are going to be videos that you will not want to miss. Thank you.